up guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to my YouTube channel and my August 2020 wrap-up. August was by no means a conventional month for anyone, I'm sure, but I still found the time to read 12 books this month, despite the fact that I went on a cross-country road trip with my family. The first book that I read was The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows by Olivia Waite. This is the second in her Feminine Pursuits series, and it is a sapphic romance novel between two middle-aged women. This book, much like the first in the series, The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, is so intelligent and incorporates such a larger story and commentary on Regency England than just the romance itself. While the romance is given plenty of time to develop, I really appreciated that the friendship between the two women is developed before they kind of realize their physical attraction to each other. It also is about beekeeping and radical printing, and there's this overarching plot of the trial against Queen Caroline by King George, who was accusing her of adultery, even though he definitely committed adultery himself. The main characters are the owner of a print shop and a beekeeper, and they both get to info dump about their respective professions, and it's clear that the author did so much research into both of these things and the technology at the time. I learned a lot about beekeeping, and I thought it was so interesting the way that beekeeping and the plot with the queen and also their romance related to each other. It was just such an intricate, smart novel. I don't know a better word than that to describe it, and I really recommend it as a romance novel. Maybe not one to pick up when you kind of just want mindless fluff, which is totally fine. I'm not knocking mindless fluff. I've read and enjoyed many mindless fluff romances. This one is a bit heavier. It's not sad or anything, but it's a bit more of a challenging one, and it took me quite a bit to get through. Next was The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez, which is one of my favorite novels that I read this year. Oh my gosh. This book was absolutely incredible. And it's a debut. It's one of the best debut novels I've ever read. Such a strong plot, characters, descriptions, world building. This book has everything. You want queer found family? I shed real tears over this book. So, in short, it is a very Le Guin style novel in that it starts with several short stories that then expand into an overarching plot. But Mia Imani is a black pilot of a ship that travels faster than light. She has a contract of 4 years in her time, but it takes 15 years to go back and forth from a single planet, where every time she sees this man, she and him have a relationship, and she does not really age, even though he's lived out his entire life by the time her contract is done. But the last time that she is on the planet, he asks her to take care of an orphan who fell from the sky, who doesn't speak but only plays the flute. Their story progresses from there, also involves a lesbian Japanese engineer named Fumiko, who is a very complex character, not one that's easy to love, but definitely a super interesting and nuanced character who is from Earth and is 1,000 years old and designed the 4 spaceships that much of the people of this world live on, and has been in and out of cryogenic sleep for 1,000 years. Doesn't really remember kind of what's going on, but she tells Mia that the boy that she sort of adopted may have the secrets to instantaneous space flight, and asks Mia and a hand-picked crew to take care of him for 15 years in real time, going from planet to planet, never staying one place for long, until she kind of figures out if he can instantaneously travel anywhere in the galaxy. The levels of found family in this book are like Le Guin, just done so beautifully in such a short amount of time. Without spoiling too much, the amount of time spent on the found family in this book is not very many chapters, but it's illustrated so perfectly in just such a few lines, and it has one of my favorite characters who is a asexual party planner named Sartoris. he just loves interacting with people, and yet he's stuck on this spaceship for 15 years. And it's through his journals that we view part of the book. He's such a wonderful character, and he's, you know, very naive when it comes to spaceflight, but so good at party planning. I love Sartoris, and I loved getting ace representation. He is a black woman, and then the boy is gay. He is a person of color. It's ambiguous. I cannot recommend this book enough, not just in terms of the representation, but also the astounding plotting. I have nothing but praise for this. It's going on my best book of the year list. It was just incredible. The next book that I read was The Midnight Lie by Maria Rudkowski. I listened to this on audiobook, and it is a sapphic fantasy that takes place in Rudkowski's Winners trilogy, which I haven't read, and you don't need to. This book is very much standalone. I mean, it's not standalone because there's going to be another book, but you don't have to read the Winners trilogy, because I didn't. But it is about a young woman who is born inside a walled city, and because of her birth, she's known as half-kith. She's not allowed to leave until she meets an intriguing young woman who's a foreigner named Sid, who kind of makes a bargain with her and entices her to venture beyond the wall. And in doing so, Nareem, the main character, discovers a lot of things about herself and about the city that she lives in and her own inner strength. The descriptions in this book were beautiful. I mean, they were exquisite, and I thought the relationship was very cute. Sid is like really good butch representation. I feel like we don't see a lot of butches in sapphic media, but Sid was fabulous. Nareem thinks that she's a boy at first because she can't really see her face, and Sid never says that she's a girl. I love Sid's kind of like self-confidence, which kind of hid like a gooey interior. So good. My main problem with this book is that the plot doesn't show up until like 50% of the way through. So if you read the blurb, it is a little misleading because the world building takes up a good chunk of the book. And while that was fine and you kind of needed that background to understand the book, I just wish that the plot had arrived sooner, and the actual like plot of it seemed very rushed. The climax really only happens in like the last chapter. I'm worried that a lot of it was just set up for the next few books, which is really annoying. I don't know if I'll be picking up the next book, especially because of how this book ended. No spoilers. I don't know if I really want to continue, but the romance was cute. I thought the descriptions and the world building were good, but the plotting just kind of took a back seat. The next 3 books I already reviewed, so that was The King of Crows by Libba Bray, and The Penguin Book of Japanese Short Stories edited by Jay Rubin. I reviewed both of these in my Tone Tomble wrap-up, so I will link to that down below. I also recently reviewed Displacement by Kiku Hughes, so I'm not going to talk about that here, so I will also link down below to my video of that review. And then the next book that I finished was Under the Black Flag by David Cordingley. This is a nonfiction book about the history of pirates. I was sort of reading it because I was going through a pirate phase earlier this month, and I also needed to do some research for a novel that I'm writing, and it was good research, but it was also just very poorly, not written necessarily, but laid out. It was divided very bizarrely into different topics rather than chronology. Pirate democracy and like pirate hunters were 2 different chapters, and just kind of went all over the map in terms of time period, so that was annoying. It took me a while to get through. All nonfiction books have kind of a thesis, a lens with which to look at the topic they're discussing, but David Cordingley's thesis was that pirates are bad, and I mean, I think he did a pretty good job of convincing me that yeah, they like, you know, tortured and killed a lot of people and traded slaves, but I was also mad because like I do love pirate media, and yeah, okay, pirates in real life like weren't that great, but like, don't you wish they could have been? So that was my main gripe, that this book kind of shattered my illusions of how cool pirates were. Boo. Next was Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram. I wasn't going to buy this when it came out because it came out last week. I was going to wait until September rolled around, and then I read the preview and I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I downloaded it and read it in one day. This is the sequel to a book that I love that I read back in May, Darius the Great Is Not Okay. In that book, Darius and his family go to Iran, where his mother is from, to visit his family, And in this book, they've returned to the States. They live in Portland, and it's more an exploration of Darius's relationship and also a lot of his family stuff, but also he comes out as gay in between the two books, and by this book he has a boyfriend. The book absolutely needed him to already be in a relationship because of the themes it was following, so this isn't like a romance novel. He's already in an established relationship, so I'll get to that in a minute. Darius's family is so wonderful, and it's so good to see a family in YA that loves each other. Darius is a wonderful big brother to his sister Layla, who's suffering from racism and microaggressions in her classroom. His relationship with his dad is stronger than ever after the events of the previous book. They're really physically affectionate with each other. It's adorable to see. He has a great heart-to-heart with his mom. Also, his grandmothers come to visit. Those are his dad's parents. One of them is a trans woman, and so it talks about his relationship with them and also discussing his grandmother's transition. That was super interesting. I can't think of another book with a trans grandparent, so that was really neat. But getting to the relationship, which I thought was just so important and like I identified with so much. So Darius and his boyfriend Landon are having problems because Landon wants to have sex and Darius isn't ready yet. It's not that he's ace, he may be demisexual, but he's just not feeling ready for physical sex yet, which is so important. I identified with this book like to an absurd degree, not getting too much into my own personal stuff, but Darius had a lot of discussions with Landon about how he just wasn't feeling ready and how Landon was kind of making him uncomfortable. Not that the relationship was toxic, it's just that physically things weren't quite working out for them. And wow, yeah, that was just like I said, very relatable and also just really cool to see in YA. I don't know that I've read that being discussed in YA before. I ultimately didn't like this one as much as the first one, and while that doesn't mean that the book is bad, it's just that what I thought was so beautiful about the first one was Darius connecting to his Iranian heritage and getting to meet his family he'd never seen before. And this book didn't have that, and like that's totally fine. I understand that this book couldn't be set in Iran because they'd left, but yeah, I just didn't think it was as good as the first. Also, there's a lot of anxiety in this book about relationship, family, financial stability. I was in a really anxious place when I was reading this book, and so I think that kind of detracted from my enjoyment. I think it was just a case of it being me and not the book. The next book I read was The Tradition by Jericho Brown. This is a book of poetry. I talked about this when I hauled it in my library book haul. Jericho Brown is a queer black poet. He does some really interesting things with forms of poetry, especially a form that he calls the duplex, which is kind of like a pantoum in that lines are repeated in interesting ways. So as an example, this poem is called Duplex. I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. Some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need most need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who love me are men who miss me in the dream where I am an island. In the dream where I am an island, I glow green with hope. I'd like to end there. So it is talking about being gay, being black, and I enjoyed it, although I don't feel like I'm a super good judge of poetry. I feel like I need to be a more active reader when it comes to poetry. So yeah. I then read Wade in the Water by Tracy K. Smith, which is another book of poetry. Tracy K. Smith is a black woman and was the Poet Laureate of the United States in 2018, and I was knocked out by this book, just blown away. It was incredible. If I could have underlined these poems, I would. I want to share one of the poems with you called Ash that I just thought was astounding. And while I find that, this book does really interesting found poetry with letters written by former slaves trying to get their pensions and reparations and find each other during and after the Civil War. That was incredible. It talks a lot about being black and motherhood, and I really need to buy a copy of this book because I just thought it was amazing and I want to do some more close reading of it. So this is Ash by Tracy K. Smith. Strange house we must keep and fill, house that eats and pleads and kills, House on legs, house on fire, house infested with desire. Haunted house, lonely house, house of trick and suck and shrug. Give it to me, house, I need you, baby, house. House whose rooms are pooled with blood. House with hands, house of guilt, house that other houses built. House of lies and pride and bone, house afraid to be alone. House like an engine that churns and stalls, house with skin and hair for walls. House the seasons singe and douse, house that believes it is not a house. Whew! So yeah, please read this book. It was very, very good. The next book that I finished was The Afterword by E.K. Johnston, which I listened to on audiobook. It was read by 3 different narrators, which is really neat because it's told in a lot of flashbacks. The present day section are read by one narrator, and then there's split POV during the flashbacks, and those are each read by a different narrator. The premise is that it takes place after a grand quest has been completed, and these 2 women who were on the quest are trying to figure out kind of what life is like post-quest. One of them is a thief and is still doing thievery. One of them is a knight who is trying to figure out how she can pay off her knight debt, basically like her student loans. And she thinks that the only way she's going to be able to do that is to marry, despite the fact that she is in love with the thief and they want to be together. And it keeps flashing back to moments of them being on the quest, kind of like key moments and moments when they were falling in love. It's fantasy, but the author didn't really do any work in world building because it's basically a gender swapped version of the Bulgariad by David Eddings. So I felt like the author kind of already expected you to know what the setting was, and that just felt really, really lazy to me. There are multiple characters of color in this book, all from the same kingdom, but it doesn't get into the different races or like if they immigrated or if these races have always lived in this kingdom. So that just felt, like I said, lazy to me. There were a lot of cool elements, especially the found family. There were just some really good, helpful mentor figures in this book. The 2 main characters, Calanthe and Ulsa, were the youngest people on the quest, and the rest were knights or a mage, and they all have just like great advice and a lot of love for each other, and they all consider each other to be their family. So I wanted more of that. This was one book where I could have taken or left the romance, but I really wanted it to be more about the like platonic relationships, and I thought it was going to be more about the post-quest, but the during quest stuff took up like a good third to a half of the book, which I felt kind of defeated the purpose because it's called The Afterword. It was about both the quest and what came after the quest, and I really wish she would have just committed to her previous premise and kind of left us in the dark about what happened on the quest, or just written both books separately. I don't know, like, I think that this book had a lot of good elements and they just weren't coming together. In a review that I wrote for the Storygraph, I compared it to a stew where she didn't kind of let all the ingredients simmer and fully incorporate, because with stews you just gotta let that baby slow simmer for a while. I felt that there was a really good book that could have been, but it didn't quite all come together. The final book that I read this month was The Gauntlet by Karuna Riazi. This is a book written by a Muslim woman about a hijabi Muslim girl and her 2 best friends who are pulled into a living board game when the main character, Farah's little brother, stumbles into it. So it's a middle grade fantasy, very Middle Eastern inspired. The kind of main location is Soak, and a lot of the kind of background characters are Middle Eastern. I was not the target audience for this book, and I think that detracted from my enjoyment of it, so I think this is another case of it being not the book necessarily, but me. There's a hijabi Muslim girl out there who is going to adore this book, and I would love to give her a copy. Unfortunately, it was just not for me. I also thought that a lot of the secondary characters were just kind of there. They didn't have a lot of defining characteristics or any arc whatsoever. Farah, the main character, was great. She was very intelligent and, kind of leaned on her friends while also leading them. But her 2 best friends, Alex and Essie, I thought that they were gonna get more character development or character traits, and I feel like they were only loosely sketched. Same with some of the characters that they met within the game. they felt like they needed a much longer book to kind of be fleshed out. So this book was not for me, but that's totally fine, and I know that someone is going to love this. So regretfully, I did not really enjoy this book. And that is all that I read in August. I wanted to talk real quick about my September TBR. I don't think I'm going to do a September TBR video because my TBR is just all the books that I've mentioned that I was going to read in August and I didn't get to. So that's anything from my Dice TBR, my Tome Topple TBR, and my library book haul. Those are all books that I need to read, so I'm hopefully going to be getting to those this month. I have some audiobooks that I'm listening to that aren't part of that list, so we'll see how things go. But I'm currently listening to Bloody Rose on audiobook, which is going okay. I'm a little worried about the direction it's going in. Mostly it seems to be like, hey kids, did you know racism is bad? And despite having a lesbian main character, it also feels like very bro-y. But we'll see, I'm not that far into it. And then I'm reading The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Pope, which was kindly provided to me by the publisher. That one comes out mid-October. It is a fantasy romance, and I'm really enjoying it so far. It's super cute. So you will hear more about those later. And that is all that I have for you. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.